Welcome everybody again to the 42 Courses podcast. I'm Louise Ward, and today I'm absolutely delighted to have join me somewhat of maybe a superstar in my eyes, and it is the author of a more well-known previous book, The Science of Storytelling, and now the new book, A Story is a Deal, Will Storr. Welcome to 42 Courses, Will.
Thank you, Louise. It's great to be here.
And as I was just saying, your previous book was very successful, The Science of Storytelling. And now that was 2019, is that right?
Something like that. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And now we're launching into a new book, A Story is a Deal. Very lovely cover. Very, very inventive, telling a story in itself. And I suppose today we're going to be talking about why storytelling really is such a fundamental part of the human experience.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't you just give us a little kick-off, Will, and tell us what is it about storytelling? What is it that first drew you to studying storytelling really at such a deep level?
I mean, the very first time I remember thinking about it in these terms was a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, when I was still a journalist. I used to do a lot of human rights reporting, and I was in Colombia reporting on this business of the countryside being cleared out by paramilitaries in very violent ways, in these terrible human rights atrocities. And they would go in and they'd clear the countryside out. And then the next thing you know, there'd be like a Coca-Cola factories opening in this countryside. So it was all very suspicious, all very dodgy. And then I remember asking somebody there, like, they were saying that when the paramilitaries come or the army comes and attacks these farmers, that they all believe they're members of FARC, they're terrorists. And I was like, well, why do they believe that? Like, why do they believe these farmers are terrorists? And he said, because that's the story they've been told. That's the only story they've been told. They're poor young men. They're 18 years old. And I remember thinking, and it's sort of something clicked me. Of course, yeah. If that's the only story they've ever been told, that's what they're going to believe. And if they all believe that, that's what they're going to believe. So that was the first time I remember really thinking and actually writing about it. That the extraordinary power of story, and in this context, unfortunately, it was to encourage these terrible atrocities to happen. So that was the first time I remember thinking about it.
That's fascinating, just how the story is framed. I mean, and we always seem to see experiences of that, particularly in, as you're saying, political stories or something like that. That's fascinating. And then, so after that sort of deep dive, as I say, you had the very successful The Science of Storytelling. And now we've got, as I said, A Story is a Deal. Very interesting title. Let's talk about that first. I mean, really, we don't come on to A Story is a Deal until quite the end of the book, but we're gonna start off there. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it refers to the kind of one of the sort of ideas which the book is centered on, which is the fact that to understand persuasive storytelling, you need to understand that story isn't only something that we tell. Like, story doesn't just exist in the form of adverts and speeches and films and that kind of thing. Story is something that we do. Like, we live our lives as story. We have storytelling brains that remix reality and turn our lives into a story. And so what people exist in these two different realms at once. Like all other animals, we want survival, our physical survival, and to procreate. But humans also spend most of our psychological time in this story world, this narrative world of heroes and villains and great missions and meaning and disasters and feuds and loves and all that stuff. And so that means that as well as survival, in the story world, we want to be heroic. We want to be the heroes of the stories of our lives. And the most persuasive stories make a deal with our identity in that way. They promise that our lives are going to become in some way more heroic. And so there are two things that heroes in stories get. And the first one is connections. Heroes are beloved. They get the marriage that they want. They get the community loves them, the family loves them. That's one of their rewards. And then the second reward is status. Everybody sort of look up to them and says they're amazing. And that's also what we want. Human beings universally want those two things. We want connection and status. So when I'm talking about a story as a deal, really persuasive stories, that they make a deal with you. They say, if you buy this product or vote for this candidate or support this charity, you're going to become heroic in some way. And that's why, so many of the most successful adverts that we have, they don't actually talk at all about the products that they're selling in any real way. They don't advertise the benefits of the product physically or the quality of it. They talk about it. It's all to do with kind of identity.
And do you think once we become aware of that sort of core way in which we live our lives, the way in which marketers communicate with us, the way in which do you think it changes us? You start to see the world in a new way once you realize everything is just a story.
Yeah, I think so. It's like sort of taking the magic pill, which enables you to see, reality in a new way. It begins to explain lots of things about life. One of the main things it explains is why people keep making the same mistakes over and over again. We become human. The human race becomes more intelligent in a factual sense. We know more facts about the world and the universe and how things work. But we don't seem to become any wiser. I mean, we just look at the news today. We don't become any wiser, and the reason we don't become any wiser is because of this. Is because the brain isn't particularly interested in seeking the truth. The brain is interested in telling a story, and Putin wants to be a hero, and Trump wants to be a hero, and Kamala Harris wants to be a hero, and we all want to be heroes. And it's that drives us, not more kind of rational inverted commas drives, such as seeking truth and seeking perfect equality. All those things are kind of stories that we tell. What we actually want is our own personal heroism and our groups to be heroic too.
And you mentioned there that so many adverts don't even sometimes show the product that they're advertising. Yeah, what is it that makes a story compelling to us as humans at the really sort of emotional level?
Well, the first thing is that we've got to identify with something, with the story, with the protagonist of the story. Humans are these highly cooperative, highly social apes. So we're kind of part ape, part ant, really. We uniquely, we're an ape that solves the problems of existence in the form of these highly cooperative groups. So that's what makes us different from the other apes that are still hanging around in the trees and the forests. That's how we've become so amazing and so brilliant. That we work in these kind of super organisms. And what that means is that we're always looking for people to cooperate with. So we're always on the hunt for people like us, people who feel like us in some way. So we look to identify with people, and that's in real life. That's our friends. That's our colleagues. We're always on the hunt for people like us, but that's also in advertising. So a famous example of that would be the Apple's iconic Think Different campaign, which again says nothing at all about the quality, about the computers that they were selling. I have no idea what they were selling. But what they were selling was an identity. Like, if you're a creative person, if you're a rule breaker, if you're a world changer, you use an Apple computer. You won't use a Microsoft computer or an IBM computer. You use an Apple computer. And that works. That works on humans because we are kind of obsessed with our identity, but also broadcasting our identity to other people, so we can attract cooperative people to work with. So that's the first thing, and then the other thing, is once you're in these groups, is the promise of status. How I am this kind of person. If I use this product or service, I can become a better version of this kind of person. That's the other sort of profound promise which storytelling makes.
And we're talking there, as you say, about adverts or the stories people tell, but I think one of the most interesting ways in which you talk about the use of storytelling in the book is for its practical uses. So, you're talking about bringing people together and being in a tribe, but then within the book, you talk about that, in the corporate setting, and how as a leader within my environment, I can learn these tools, these ways of bringing people together and using stories to actually make my corporate environment more successful. Maybe you'll tell us a little bit about that, Will.
Yeah, so psychologists that study this stuff say that they use the word prototypical. So an effective leader is prototypical. So they don't lead from the mountaintop. They're not distant figures issuing rewards and punishments and orders. Those are bad leaders. Successful leaders lead from the middle, and they're prototypical. So they are like it's this thing of story being again. It's not like just telling stories. It's also being a story. It's being a character in a story, and they present as the ideal version of this group, even down to things like the language they use. So successful leaders, successful politicians use the kind of what I call the identified pronouns, i.e. we, and us more than I and me. So if a leader uses I and me a lot, then they're not going to be as successful. They're not, if they're a politician, they're not going to win as many votes. So even stuff as subtle as that. But yeah, a successful leader, as I say, it's prototypical. Like a great example is the current Pope Francis. After Benedict left, Francis named himself after St. Francis of Assisi, who was known for his commitment to poverty. And the day after he became Pope, he did this shocking thing, which was he went and paid his own hotel bill, which apparently is a massive break with protocols. Except it reported all around the world that the Pope had actually paid his own hotel bill. It's extraordinary, isn't it, for a Christian to think that that's such an amazing thing? But he did it, and again, that's being a prototypical leader. I mean, he got even more headlines when he fired this guy in Germany who became known as the Bishop of Bling, who'd spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on this palace. It included, like, I think it was a £20,000 bathtub and a £100,000 fish tank, stuff like this. So he fired the Bishop of Bling. So that's another way that he was prototypical. He was embodying the values of the group, embodying the story of the group, and that's very motivating. He was much more, when you judge it by the amount of people that go and see him take mass at the Vatican, he's much more popular amongst Catholics than Benedict ever was.
And of course, you sort of touched on this at the start, but storytelling is inherently a very basic human both need and skill that we have. And I think you even refer early on in the book to men being more attractive, or they've shown in science that men who can tell good stories, are more successful at being mates. But I mean, it is inherently part of our makeup. And we know from cave paintings, we've obviously had the urge for a long time to exchange a story, which is really fascinating. But the thing that I wondered about when I was reading that business section is, businesses all evolve. You don't set out on day one and say, when there's just whatever, two of you, and say, right, what's going to be our story? And obviously businesses change. But is it something you can actually learn to do, or are some people just inherently fantastic at telling a good story, be it for business or personal use? Or
yeah, I mean, I suppose in a way it's no different from when I'm talking to people who are writing novels and screenplays and plays. Like, some people are just inherently good at it, which is annoying. And the obvious version in business is Steve Jobs was just it was like I was in a way a bit reluctant to talk about Apple in this book because everyone writes about Apple, but then I realized it's like not writing about Shakespeare in a book about how to tell stories for fiction. It's like Steve Jobs was just a genius at this stuff, but he didn't know, because he was operating in the 80s and 90s principally, in the early 2000s. He didn't know the science behind the stuff, but he just had a great instinct for this stuff. Like he just got it. I mean, in a really fundamental way. But that doesn't mean you can't learn it. I mean, of course. I mean, and that's why I think the science is important. Understanding the storytelling brain, understanding why we think in stories, understanding the purpose of story, which is to bind us all together into these cooperative groups and to motivate and inspire us and to get us all facing in the right direction. So that's really valuable. But also, the practical stuff about how to structure a story, how to grab attention, how to keep attention. All of that stuff is, can be learned, and it's not complicated. It just takes a bit of sort of self-discipline. I think people who want to tell stories, they often want, when I'm working with them, often want to tell everything they know about the whole thing. And one of the things, especially business people struggle with, is that simplicity. It's like, no, you can say one thing in the story. You've got to communicate one idea, and that's how the story is going to be powerful. And so yeah, it takes a bit of discipline, but it's not that complicated to learn.
yes, as you say in the book, the one idea, and then within that idea, then the great detail. And of course, as you say, we're surrounded by stories, one of which I'm particularly interested in is film. And you talk about that a little bit in the book, about the best Hollywood screenwriters. And that's something that really has interested me recently. I've heard that Netflix not only are trying to sort of make the stories more simple, but make it very much verbalized, because they've realized everybody's doing something else. whilst they're watching. So it really
Yeah.
puts the onus on the screenwriter really to tell the story rather than just
Yeah.
actually have it visually engaged. And so we sort of moved on into the Hollywood zone. And so the next thing I'd sort of like to talk about is people who you think have particularly influenced you as you've gone on this sort of journey yourself, exploring storytelling. You know, you referred to the great Daniel Kahneman several times and other either neuroscientists but who would you say do you think has been most influential or particularly people you admire from the research that you've done in this new book?
Well, I suppose from the science communication perspective, Jonathan Haidt, because it was reading his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, whenever that came out, a long time ago now. That was the first book that I read that just, it completely blew my mind, because he talked about this, things like confabulation in that book, which is this idea that voice that we have in our heads that is telling us this, it's there to tell us a story of our lives and weave a convincing story of who we are and why we do what we do. And it actually has no idea. It's just making it up. So the story that we tell of ourselves is just a fabrication. It's a fiction. And I think that was the idea that really made me go, oh my God, like that. It just felt like it changed everything. Like, so I don't actually know who I am. And I don't, I can tell you why I believe what I believe and why I do what I do, but it's just rubbish. It's just made up. So that was, in terms of influence, but Jonathan Haidt didn't do that research. He just wrote about it. So, it was people like Michael Gazzaniga, who's an American scientist who did a lot of that research into confabulation. That's probably the most influential kind of researcher. One of them would be Gazzaniga. And in terms of from the story side, it would be somebody like Christopher Booker. Around the same time I was reading Happiness Hypothesis and those kinds of books, I read Christopher Booker's 7 Basic Plots, and it was reading those books side by side that really set me on this journey, because I realized that a lot of the stuff that Christopher Booker was saying about how to tell stories was similar to what the scientist was telling about how our brain works. And I was like, well, hang on a minute. So that means the brain is as a storyteller, really, in a way. And so it was that. So it was things like talking about what the kinds of things that grab our attention is unexpected change. And it's, well, that's the same as a story. That's how a story grabs attention as well. So then I started making all these connections, and that's what really set me down the path of that ended up with the science of storytelling and a story is a deal.
Yeah, that's fascinating. As you say, when you start to read about that whole science behind the stories we tell ourselves just in our day, it's quite overwhelming to start with, when that sort of, you're like, oh right, it's like that's so that's interesting to see that to hear that was influential for you. And what do you think are, as you spoke earlier, talking about advertising, the adverts that are effective, or the effective storytellers like Steve Jobs, what do you think are the mistakes people make then when crafting a story? Where is it that they go wrong?
Well, I think people overcomplicate stories a lot, and you can understand it, because people are proud of their organizations, they're proud of their products, they want to tell you everything there is to tell you about the products. But as I said, often, not often, pretty much always, the most effective pieces of communication, they're telling you one thing. I love that phrase from Bill Clinton's advisor, James Carville: if you say 3 things, you don't say anything. And that's, I think that's absolutely correct. If you're writing a 1,000-page novel, sure, you've got that complexity. But not if you've got a 90-second ad or a billboard ad. It just doesn't work. You're not writing Game of Thrones here. So I think it's that complication that throws people up, because they've got a lot to say, and it takes that discipline where you can tell a number of stories, but in each story you need to say one thing. The other thing, which I think is common, and it goes beyond, even in the realms of fiction and TV and film and all that stuff, is the importance of obstacles and goals. I think doing the research for a story is a deal really underlined that idea that a story is about a person or persons who have a goal, and there's an obstacle in their way, and by overcoming that obstacle they learn something. That's a story. A story is a unit of information that describes an obstacle and a goal. And because story evolved in the first place to help us overcome obstacles and goals as these cooperative groups. So it's telling us what the goal is, what the obstacle is, how we've got to work together to solve it. That's fundamentally what a story is, and that's why story evolved. And so learning that and sort of figuring that out really underlined the absolute importance of that. And then when you very, very often when you're watching a film or reading a book and you're getting a bit confused and bored and frustrated and distracted, very often now I realize it's because the writer has not been clear about the obstacles and goals. I don't know who wants what and what's standing in the way of getting it, and therefore I'm getting frustrated and confused and bored. So I think that's the other thing is that that is of fundamental importance. And in the book, as you know, I talk about the Apple ad Breakfast, which starred Kevin Costner and was directed by Adrian, and he did the sort of flash dance and was they thought they were telling a story, but they weren't. It was just a man using a computer in the morning with a dog. That was it. That was the story. But then the next year, the same team made with a different director, with Ridley Scott, made the famous 1994 ad, which was famously one of the most successful commercials of all time. And then the year after that, they made another terrible ad with no story called Lemmings. So they kind of I think they kind of fluked onto that thing with 1984. But as I say in the book, one of the crucial things in 1984 had was it showed somebody overcoming an obstacle in pursuit of a goal, and that was fundamentally what made it interesting and memorable and emotional. And that was what that thing had that the other two ads didn't really have at all.
Yeah, and interesting you're saying, did they fluke onto it? Because so many times you do look at things and you think, how did they get this so wrong? But is it that when they get it right, it's by chance and not by invention? And I thought that was sort of an interesting thought that was with me quite a lot in your book. I think you referred to when Kennedy came in and spoke to the people sort of during the space race, and it inspired them. And each time I was just thinking to myself, are these just all lucky moments in time that we then reflect back on to see their impact?
Well, I think so. I think very often they are, and I think it's the same is true in the world of fiction. It's very common to see, I don't know, a showrunner for Netflix, like or one of the big TV channels, or a novelist who has one amazing novel and then never managed to do it again. Like especially in the TV world, like the guy who did The Wire. He never did anything as good as that again. The guy who did Mad Men, well, where's he gone? So I do think there's an element of fluke to a lot of the great storytellers. They're obviously very talented, but they don't, because they don't study the craft, and they don't understand when they do make it work. They don't understand why they've made it work. They just sign up to that idea that I'm a genius, which is a very tempting story to tell yourself. I'm amazing, because everyone's telling them that. Well, I can just do it. I'm just a great storyteller. But then they try to do something else, and it's nowhere near as successful. So that's actually very common in the worlds of fiction, so I do think there's a lot of that. And I think part of the problem is in the world of fiction, especially, there's a snobbishness about craft. Like I meet novelists who think that trying to study plot and story structure is this kind of low status, kind of sell out, cheap, dirty thing, and they would never be seen dead. My God. And you think, God, like imagine if painters thought like that. Painters learn their craft, dancers learn their craft, but for some reason storytellers like to fall for this myth of the kind of genius who just comes up with these works from the void, and it's not from the void. I think it's just that they've read all their lives. They've got kind of an instinct for it, but then they thought that, and they can pull it off once, but because they don't know why what they're doing is working exactly, they can't replicate it with the next project and the next project. So yeah, I do think there's a lot of flukiness going on.
And is there also, in the essence of it, some kind of little sort of secret source, secret crystal? Because we can tick all the boxes, can't we? But then the result can be formulaic, or doesn't have sort of something to it. So it is, even when you know the science, it's not everything, is it?
Well, that's right. It's the same as any other art form. You can learn the craft of drawing and painting, but you're not necessarily going to be Picasso. And I could learn how to dance, but I promise you, or play football, but I'm not going to be, because talent is a real thing, and I think with storytelling, that you have got that kind of instinct, that kind of, well, it's a creativity, isn't it? Like it's doing something new, and it's especially now important now in the world of, as we're entering this new world of AI, that I think the value of that creative mind, the original mind, is going to become even more valuable than ever, because what AI does is just endlessly remix stuff that's already out there. So that creativity that you need, as well as the craft, on top of the craft, in order to make something work really well, is going to become more important than ever.
I'm glad that you've brought that up, because I was just going to ask you next. I'm just thinking about the role of storytelling in a world of AI. As you say, for some people, when you talk about this subject, they'll be saying, well, AI can only use what's already been invented. But then, I suppose that's really what humans do, keep reinventing the wheel. So, I mean, what are your feelings? Are they hopeful that AI can be used as a tool? Is it something you use yourself? What are your thoughts in these early days of AI development?
Well, I think AI at the moment for me, all it is just a really much improved Google. So if I want to ask a question, and wasn't using it to write a story as a deal, but I kind of wished I had it, because I remember desperately spending days trying to find examples of the underdog narratives from around the world and reading all these books. And then when I got AI, I just typed in, "Can I have some underdog narratives from around the world?" And it got me 20. I mean, in instant, I was like, "Oh God, so annoying!" I could have sacked myself for weeks. So I think that's what's good about it. It's like Wikipedia; you got to check this stuff. You can't just believe it. But I think in terms of the creativity, I just don't. At the moment, it's just not there yet. And and I think my definition of somebody that is a true creative, or even maybe a genius, is somebody that can break the rules, but still make it work. So do something new, and yet it still works. And that people that these are the people that are really exceptional. And I think. And I think that's the thing that AI won't ever be able to do, is to. Well, I say that's a silly thing to say. Maybe it will. I'm sure it will at some point. But certainly in the near future, I think. Well, it's that idea of doing something creatively, breaking the mold and making it work. That anybody can do something different, but actually doing something different and good. That's stuff that really gets attention. But also, storytelling is so much about the human experience and human feeling. And especially when it comes to fiction, I think it's going to be much harder for AI to create high quality, novel feature length fiction. But doubtless it will be able to do something like that at some point. But I think that's a long way off at the moment.
Fascinating. Well, maybe I could ask you then, one sort of key lesson you think you hope listeners will take away from our conversation today. What's the sort of key message for you behind a story as a deal?
Well, I think one of the key messages is that story isn't going away. Sometimes people think that storytelling is kind of a fad, but it's how our brains work. Like it's what makes us human. So it isn't a fad. I think that's the main thing. And it's really true that if you're not communicating a story, you're not communicating. If you're doing facts and data and all that kind of stuff, people aren't listening. Not really, unless you're in a particular specific world in which facts and data are the only ways that you can communicate. Certainly if you're not talking to the public, that's not how it's working. And also, it's really important to understand the story world, the fact that we experience our lives as story. This is what the current government just didn't get in the first few months of their government. Time and time again, all around the world, the stories that work are, we've got a great future under my leadership. We're going to amazing places. And that was Barack Obama, that was Tony Blair, that was Margaret Thatcher, that's Donald Trump, all these incredibly successful politicians. And all we got from Keir Starmer's government was doom and gloom and this kind of, kind of grousing about the previous government, and it's just depressing. So it's even true now that some of our leaders just do not understand storytelling, but I think more importantly that storytelling is communication with people's identity, and that's that's the really important kind of extra step, I think, that A Story's a Deal hopefully takes.
Yes, I was just reading someone saying that Barack Obama was the last of the great optimists, and we've really entered into a pessimistic zone. I think they were also referring to the percentage of pessimistic and optimistic stories young people are brought up on,
Oh, interesting.
depending on where they are living. In Russia, it's quite usual to hear quite optimistic and pessimistic and heavy stories. In the West, we're more exposed to optimism. That's the story, as you say, it's the story we need to be told to inspire us and keep us all up.
But even in Russia, in the former Soviet Union, the communists, the revolution was based on a story of the bourgeoisie, our enemies. We're going to create a utopia of equality. We're going to get rid of them, and it's going to be this kingdom of perfect fairness. And that was an optimistic future, an optimistic story that underpinned the communist revolution. So even there, that they are clearly wanting to hear those kinds of stories. And with Barack Obama, like, I think as a left-wing person, it's easy to think, he was the last optimistic politician. But if you're a Republican in America, Donald Trump is optimistic because he's saying he's going to make America great again. So I think it's important that we don't, that we kind of reach out of our echo chambers sometimes and see that it feels to us pessimistic what he's doing, of course, but to them it isn't. It's this is what they want. He's in the business of making America great again, and that's the story that millions of people in America believe. And the optimistic story is the one that Kamala Harris's campaign just didn't manage to tell at the election last year.
Yes, well, I mean, we could talk about storytelling, I think, all day. I'm going to hold up the book again. A Story is a Deal by Will Storr. It really is fantastic at breaking down, what is the essence of storytelling, why it's important to us as humans, the role that it plays both in, your own personal life, but also in the corporate life, in marketing and advertising. Our whole world basically is a story. So there really is something in there, I think, for absolutely everybody. And the thing that I particularly liked was being introduced to new people who Will has researched in this subject. And you can go away down your own rabbit hole if there are areas that interest you, but that's certainly something that I like to do. So apart from buying the book, Will, where can listeners find out more about your work?
Well, that's a good question. Now, I'm about to launch a Substack newsletter called You Are a Story, so that's going to be launching in a couple of weeks. So if you just Google, I think it's willstorr.substack.com, but if but Google will tell you, or indeed AI.
All your fans can all follow your writing there, so that's fantastic. Okay, well, that's really been so lovely. A very easy conversation for me. Very, very interesting. Will, it's been lovely to meet you here, and I'd like to thank you for joining us on today's 42 Courses podcast. Thank you to everybody who's listened. Hope you've enjoyed our conversation, and do look out for more recordings in the future. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Louise. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this 42 Courses podcast. If you did, please like and share. Any comments are also very, very welcome. And of course, if you want to learn more about us, visit our website at 42courses.com. Thanks again.